Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Jesus risen from the dead in our continuing study of the life of Christ. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all present essentially the same statement. And we're going to look at these sort of in parallel. Matthew's account starts off in chapter 28, verse 1. Now, after the Sabbath, as it began toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, we're not told who the other Mary is, came to look at the grave. Meanwhile, Mark starts off when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome. So you find out it's not just two women, it's more than two, or three are mentioned here, so that they might come and anoint him. Luke's account starts off, but on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came. You have to go back to the previous chapter, and also later on in Luke chapter 24, when you get down to, I think it's around verse 12, you have the names of the women listed, both Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and John, but also some other women as well. So when you put all of these together, you find out it's a number of women that come. Notice in Matthew's account, he mentions that an earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord had descended from heaven and rolled the stone away. Mark's account, looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large. Luke's account, they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. In Matthew's account, we mentioned the angel, and it focuses upon that. His appearance was like lightning, his clothes as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him. Mark and Luke are not mentioning the guards. Matthew makes special mention of them because they're going to play a part later on in that chapter. And so it's important to see that there could be people that are there and not necessarily mentioned. For example, in Mark, entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right. You get the impression he's an angel, whereas in Matthew's account, you were told that. Luke chapter 24, while they were perplexed about this, behold, two men. So Mark mentions one. Luke says, well, no, there were two, suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing. Notice what the angel or angels plural say. In Matthew's account, do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who's been crucified. He's not here, for he is risen, just as he said. Mark's account, do not be amazed. You're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who's been crucified. He's risen. He's not here. Notice those are virtually identical. Luke's account, why do you seek the living one among the dead? He's not here, but he is risen. So in each case, an announcement is made to the women of the resurrection of Jesus. And not just an announcement, but instructions. In Matthew's account, go quickly and tell his disciples that he's risen from the dead, and behold, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. In Mark's account, but go tell his disciples and Peter. Tradition has it that Mark actually gets his gospel information from Peter. That might or might not be the case, but notice Peter's mentioned here. He is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And then in Luke's account, it just mentions how they remembered his words and they returned from the tomb and reported all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Notice it's to the 11, but there's others that are around too. All the rest. That's a hint. Now I want to turn to John's account, because John's account is going to be very different. I don't think it's contradictory, but it is different. It doesn't mention the other woman. It's only going to focus upon one, and that is Mary Magdalene. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb. Doesn't say that she was alone. The other women, I think, if we put them all together, they were there, but the camera, as it were, is focused only upon one person, Mary Magdalene. Notice she comes while it was still dark and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. So she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple. Now, did she stay around to talk to the angels? I don't know. We're not told. So we can put it together, but we can only put it together sort of in a rough way. Notice she goes to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved. We've seen that reference earlier in the Gospel of John. Um, and I'm not going to identify, although I'm not going to identify him, although I have a very strong suspicion as to who he really is. But we'll stick with this, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And she said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb. We do not know where they have laid him." So she has come to a conclusion. Maybe the other woman initially, maybe before or after they saw the angels. I don't know about that. Verse 3, so Peter and the other disciple went forth, and they were going to the tomb. The two were running together, and the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first, and stooping and looking in, because tombs, it's not like a house. It's not, doesn't have a full-size door. I've been in a number of tombs going back to the first century, and in nearly every one of them, you had to bend over to get into it, and this is what's taking place here. He gets there, and he stoops down, and he's looking in. Notice he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in, at least not yet. Verse 6, and so Simon Peter also came, following him, and entered the tomb, and he saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on his head, but not lying with the linen wrappings. So notice it's two separate pieces of cloth rolled up in a place by itself. Verse 8, so the other disciple who had first come to the tomb then also entered. Once he sees that Peter's gone in, he feels, okay, I can go in too. But verse 9, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Jesus had told them this, not once, but on at least three different occasions. But they really didn't get it, because after all, there's times when Jesus spoke in symbolism and in parable, and they weren't sure how literal do we go. And so they hear and they believe. What are they believing? I don't know for sure that they're believing that Jesus has risen. They're at least believing the tomb is empty at this point. And notice, because they didn't understand. Verse 10, so the disciples went away again to their own homes. Verse 11, but Mary was standing outside the tomb weeping. And so as she wept, she stooped and looked into the tomb, and she saw the two angels in white sitting. Now, we didn't read that Peter and that other disciple saw this. So remember that Matthew, Mark, and Luke might have been compressing the events. Here are the woman. Mary is the one that's being seen here. And, they see one angel. And if you see one, you see the other two. She saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head, one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. Typically, for a new tomb, especially a wealthy man's tomb, you'd have a big slab set up where the body would be wrapped and left there to decompose. And then once it had decomposed, at a much later date, maybe a year or so later, people would come back in and take the bones, collect them, and place them into an ossuary, sort of a stone box that was built to hold the bones. And so she sees the angels, one at the head, one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. Verse 13, and they said to her, woman, why are you weeping? She said to them, because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. She is still under the assumption that someone has moved the body. Verse 14, when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. I don't know if his face was turned away or she didn't look at his face. We're not told the details. Verse 15, Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Now, he had just, remember on the cross, he had addressed his mother, woman, behold your son. And son, and he had addressed the other man, the one the disciple whom Jesus loved, son, behold your mother. But now he says, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener. And this tells me that this is a rather extensive gardener, or a rather extensive garden, an area. And here was somebody whose job it was, she thought, to take care of it. She said to him, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away. And she's still thinking that the body has merely been moved. Verse 16, Jesus said to her, Mary. And there was something about her name. And she turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means, and now we have the Rabboni is Hebrew, which means teacher. Actually, it's my teacher, but this is good enough. Verse 17, Jesus said to her, stop clinging to me. Now, the fact that it says stop clinging to me, the old King James said, don't touch me not, something like that. But it's in the present tense. And when a negative is given in the present, it's stop doing that thing that you're doing. I think that's the idea here. And so the translators were correct to render it this way. Stop touching, or stop holding to me, or stop clinging to me. For I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brethren and say, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God. And that doesn't mean he's about to go up right then, but it does mean, no, you can't. I can't stay with you. We need to separate. Go tell them, because there's things to be done. There are appearances to be made. There's an agenda which needs to be followed, and it will culminate in my ascension. Notice, to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came announcing to the disciples, I've seen the Lord. Now, as far as we can tell, this is the first instance where somebody had actually said, I saw the risen Jesus, and that he had said these things to her. So she gives a report to them. And again, they're not quite sure what to make of this. And probably for several reasons. One is they're not expecting a resurrection. Two, they had been trained by their culture not necessarily to believe the word of a woman. And I know that sounds misogynistic and chauvinistic, and I suppose it is, but it was a culture in which they lived in that day. Now, I want to talk a bit about some of the naturalistic theories for the report of the resurrection. These are theories that critics have come up with. One is the legend theory, that the whole idea of a resurrection is just something that was dreamed up and sort of talked about. And I would say the problem with the legend theory, that this is just a legend that grew up, is that there were people that were dying for it at the time who were saying, I saw Jesus. And all they had to do to stop the killing, to stop the persecution, was to say, oh no, it's just a story. Few people who've actually studied the event even give lip service to the legend theory. A second theory, and this is the theory that Mary first came up with, that the body was moved. She just assumed that was the case. Maybe Peter and that other disciple had assumed the same thing, that somebody came and moved the body to a new location. But if that's true, then to where was it moved? You see, everybody had a vested interest in finding the body. Both the followers of Jesus, who wanted it to be cared for. That's what Mary's first question is. Where is it so that we can care for it? And the enemies of Jesus had reason not to move the body, because this whole Christianity thing came up, and they're going to have to persecute it. All they would have had to do to put a stop to it is produce the body. So no, the body was not moved. Furthermore, there's this idea of the swoon theory. This is the idea that Jesus on the cross didn't really die. He just merely was injured, and then in the cool of the tomb, and with all those nice little wrappings that sort of soothed his wounds, he woke up and stumbled out, and people saw him alive, and they thought, oh, he's risen from the dead. And then after that, he finally succumbed to his wounds, and then he died. All sorts of problems with this. First of all, the Roman soldiers who had him on the cross did not take him off until they certified that he was dead, and their whole career was in taking live people and making them dead. That's what soldiers, that's what they're all about. They're all about killing people, and they made sure that it was the case. They took a spear and plunged it into his side. And then they wrapped him in all of these spices. That would not revive him. If anything, if he had only been injured, that would have killed a normal person. As they wrapped him in, we're actually given the weight of the spices. It was considerable weight. Um, and then there was a stone that was rolled into place. And so the swoon theory would have to explain, how did he roll off this very heavy stone, which was so heavy that the women had wondered, how on earth are we? Remember, there's a number of women there. How are we going to move this? And plus there were guards that had been placed outside the tomb to make sure he stayed in the tomb. So the swoon theory fails on every count. Um, Another theory is the mistaken tomb theory. This says that Mary just happened to go. After all, it was early morning. The sun wasn't quite up yet. She went to the wrong tomb, and she goes in and she sees the tomb that's empty and thinks, "Oh my, he's risen from the dead." Well, all sorts of problems with that. First of all, she didn't think that he had risen from the dead. She had assumed that second view, that the body had been moved. That was the natural assumption that she and the disciples made. But to say that she went to the wrong tomb, then you have the problem because Peter and the other disciple went to the wrong tomb. And then you have the issue of Joseph of Arimathea, whose tomb it was. I imagine he eventually went and used his tomb. Um, so this whole idea of the wrong tomb. If he went to use his tomb, there's already a body in it. It was the body of Jesus. So no, the mistaken tomb theory is in error as well. Finally, the vision theory, and we'll see more about this in a future session. That they only imagined that they saw Jesus. They had a vision. Well, we're going to see the testimony of one of the disciples who actually had come to that conclusion. You guys must have been seeing things. But for my part, I'm not going to believe unless I touch and put my finger into the nail print in his hand and put my hand. I want to touch and feel and make sure it's not merely a vision. And of course, that's going to be the story of Thomas, but we'll see him in the future. Paul speaking a number of years later, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he gives a report. He says, I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received. So he's passing the word that had been given to him, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. He continues, and that he appeared to Cephas. Now, Cephas is an Aramaic name. It just means rocky in Aramaic. The way you say that in Greek would be Petra. So Peter, Cephas, that's the same name. Notice he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time. Now, notice the 12 is a designation. You say, well, wait a second. Did that include Judas Iscariot? I think this probably included the 12, the one who became part of that 12, and when we get to Acts chapter 1, that he was one of those that Jesus appeared to. But notice verse 6, after that he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time. Now, we don't know when he did this. We're not told in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John when he did this, but Paul's able to report he appeared to more than 500 brethren, not just separately, but at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Remember that by the time Paul writes this, a good 20 years have passed, actually a bit more than that. 20, 25, 30 years have passed, and Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and of those 500, some now have died, but most of them are still around, and you can go ask them, and they can tell you about the one who was dead and who was raised from the dead and who they had seen with their own eyes. And then, notice how he says, he appeared to James. Now, James is a really common name, but I think when Paul is speaking of James here, he's not talking about one of the two men who were apostles of Jesus that had this name, because it was a very common name, but rather I think this is James, the half-brother of Jesus, the one who was not a son of Mary. Well, actually, might have been a son of Mary, Might have been, when I say half-brother of Jesus, remember that Joseph was his adopted father, but not his natural father. Um, so James, as being the brother of Jesus, might have been, on the one hand, a son of Joseph by an earlier marriage. Some people have suggested that. Might have been the son of Joseph and Mary after the birth of Jesus. But this, I think, is the brother of Jesus. And remember that earlier in the Gospels, we read about how James and his brothers did not believe in Jesus. But that changed when they saw the risen Jesus. That changed for James. Jesus appeared to James. And so when we get to the book of Acts, we're going to see James as a leader in the church, as one of the Christians who is saying, yes, I've come to believe in Jesus, not just as my half brother, but as the very Son of God, the Christ, the Messiah. And notice, and then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, Paul is able to say, he appeared to me also. Because Jesus had shown up. Now this was by way of a vision. This was by way of because Jesus had already ascended into heaven, but Jesus appeared to the Apostle Paul and changed this skeptic, because Paul had been a skeptic. He had been so skeptical of Christianity, he had been out persecuting Christians and having them arrested. But then he met Jesus. And that changed him from Paul, the Christian hater, to Paul, the disciple maker. And Paul was changed and gives his testimony, adds his testimony to the fact that Jesus has indeed risen from the dead. Now, some evidences for the resurrection. First of all, the empty tomb. As we said, that's the initial evidence that's given in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and I would say even John. But it doesn't stop there. The existence of the church, because the church was given birth by those who had seen the risen Jesus. They had no reason to continue this Christian movement apart from having seen him. Their fundamental message was that we saw the one who had died and who rose again from the dead. The appearances of Jesus then are the evidences for the resurrection. He wasn't seen by just one or two. He wasn't seen just in hiding. He was seen by a great many people. And finally, the transformation of the disciples. These men who had, at the arrest of Jesus, all you had seen is heels and elbows as they had run away to go and hide. As you see them at the time of the resurrection, they're hiding. They're in an upper room with the door closed. They're afraid. But what happens after they've seen Jesus? They are standing and preaching in his name, and they are being threatened by the Jewish authorities, threatened with torture, with death. And they will not speaking because they have seen him, and they know that he is alive. And they know that he has conquered death. He has conquered death, the death that he died, but he has also conquered death for us. Because he died and rose again, even if we die, we will live again.